The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Jake first spotted the smoke rising from beyond the ridge. It was a thin, desperate plume, the kind that spoke of a dying fire, carefully nursed through a bitter night. He'd been tracking the raiding party for 3 days across the frozen plains, his jaw set with the kind of determination that comes from burying friends. The Comanche warriors had struck his settlement without warning, taking supplies, horses, and the life of young Tommy Patterson, who'd made the mistake of reaching for his rifle too quickly. Jake was a rancher, not a soldier, but out here on the frontier, every man learned to ride, shoot, and survive. His weathered hands gripped the reins of his horse as he considered his options. The smart thing would be to ride back, gather more men, return with enough guns to ensure justice was served. But 3 days of hard riding had brought him to this moment, and the tracks were fresh. He was close now, perhaps too close to turn back. As he crested the ridge, he saw him. A single warrior, sitting alone beside a sputtering fire, no larger than what a child might make. The man's horse lay nearby, clearly injured, its labored breathing visible even from a distance. There were no other warriors in sight. They must have left him behind. In this harsh land, that was a death sentence as sure as any bullet. Jake's hand moved instinctively to the rifle across his saddle. One shot. That's all it would take. This man might have been there when Tommy died. Might have been one of those who'd laughed as they burned the Patterson barn. Justice was within reach, simple and clean. But something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way the warrior sat, not with the proud bearing of a fighter, but with the slumped shoulders of a man who knew his fate. Or perhaps it was the memory of his own father's words, spoken years ago before consumption had taken him. Son, there's killing that needs doing in this world, and then there's murder. A man's got to know the difference, even when it's hard. Jake sat on his horse for what felt like an eternity, watching. The warrior knew he was there, that much was certain. Yet the man made no move toward his weapons, which lay several feet away in the frost-covered grass. Instead, he simply stared into his failing fire, accepting whatever judgment the dawn would bring. The decision, when it came, surprised even Jake himself. He dismounted slowly, keeping his rifle ready but pointed at the ground. He approached the campfire with careful steps, each one a choice he could still reverse. The warrior's eyes tracked him, dark and unreadable, but still he didn't reach for his weapons. When Jake was close enough to feel the meager warmth of the dying flames, he did something that defied every bit of frontier logic he'd ever learned. He unslung the pack from his shoulder and pulled out kindling and dried wood he'd been carrying. Without a word, he began to build up the fire. The warrior watched in silence as the flames grew stronger, casting warmth into the bitter morning air. Only when the fire was properly established did Jake step back, though he kept his rifle close. He could see now that the warrior was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps not much older than Tommy had been. There was a wound in his leg, poorly bandaged and showing signs of infection. The kind of wound that would kill a man slowly if the cold didn't take him first. They sat like that as the sun climbed higher, two enemies sharing warmth in a landscape that cared nothing for their conflicts. Jake pulled out some dried meat and hardtack from his supplies. He ate slowly, aware of the warrior's eyes on the food. After a long moment, he tossed a piece of the dried meat across the fire. The warrior caught it with reflexes that spoke of better days, before injury and abandonment. Neither man spoke. Jake knew only a handful of Comanche words, none of them suitable for this strange détente. But silence sometimes says what words cannot. The fire crackled between them, neutral ground in a war that had consumed so many lives on both sides. As the morning wore on, Jake found himself thinking about the cycles of violence that had brought them to this moment. The settlers pushed west, claiming land the tribes had known for generations. The tribes fought back, defending what was theirs. Men died on both sides, and each death demanded vengeance, which led to more deaths, more vengeance, spiraling endlessly like water circling a drain. He thought about Tommy, barely 17, who'd wanted nothing more than to build a life on this harsh frontier. He thought about this warrior's family, who might be waiting for a son or husband who would never return home. And he thought about what his father would say about the choice he was making now, to share his fire with the enemy rather than exact the revenge that frontier justice demanded. The sun reached its zenith and began its descent toward the western horizon. Jake knew he should move on, but something kept him there. Perhaps it was the recognition that in leaving this warrior alive, he was making a choice about what kind of man he wanted to be. Or perhaps it was simply that in this moment of shared humanity, the lines that divided them seemed less absolute than they had 3 days ago when he'd set out on this trail. As afternoon shadows grew long, Jake made his decision. He stood, and the warrior tensed, perhaps expecting the blow that had been delayed but not forgotten. Instead, Jake gathered more wood and built the fire higher. He placed his remaining dried meat and some hardtack beside the flames, along with a water skin. Then he walked to his horse, mounted, and prepared to ride away. Before leaving, he turned back one final time. The warrior was watching him with an expression Jake couldn't quite read. Jake touched his hand to his hat in a gesture that was neither salute nor farewell but something in between. Then he turned his horse north, back toward his settlement, leaving the enemy alive behind him. He rode through the sunset and into the night, his mind churning with questions about what he'd done. Had he betrayed Tommy's memory? Would the warrior recover and raid again? Had he shown mercy or merely weakness? The questions had no easy answers, and Jake knew they would haunt him for a long time to come. The unthinkable happened at sunrise 3 weeks later. Jake was checking on his cattle in the north pasture when he spotted a rider approaching. His hand went to his gun, then froze. It was a Comanche warrior, riding slowly with one hand raised in peace. As the rider drew closer, Jake recognized him. It was the man from the fire. The warrior stopped 20 yards away and dismounted with visible effort. His legs still troubled him, but he was alive. From his saddle, he pulled something wrapped in buckskin and laid it on the ground. Then, with a nod that might have been respect or acknowledgement or something else entirely, he remounted and rode away. Jake approached cautiously and unwrapped the bundle. Inside were 3 eagle feathers bound with intricate beadwork, and beside them, a leather pouch containing seeds, corn, beans, and squash. Among the tribes, he knew, such gifts carried deep meaning. This was not payment or debt, but recognition. A life for a life. Honorek nali. But there was something else in the bundle. A small strip of cloth torn from a cavalry uniform, stained with blood. And wrapped inside it, a piece of paper with crude drawings, a map showing where the rest of the raiding party had fled, and where they planned to strike next. Jake stood in the morning light, holding the impossible gift from an impossible ally. The warrior had betrayed his own band to warn the settlements, had given Jake the chance to prevent more death. All because one cold morning, a rancher had chosen to share his fire rather than take a life. The frontier was a hard place that made hard men, and violence often seemed the only language anyone spoke. But on that frozen morning, 2 enemies had found something else. A moment of recognition that beneath the war paint and the sunburn, the buckskin and the homespun, they were both just men trying to survive in an unforgiving land. Jake never saw the warrior again. He used the information to warn the settlements, and the raids were prevented. In time, the story became legend, told around campfires much like the one that had been shared that cold morning. Some called Jake a fool. Others called him a hero. He never much cared for either label. All he knew was that when he'd had the chance to add one more death to the endless tally, he'd chosen differently. And somehow, impossibly, that choice had rippled outward in ways he never could have predicted. The unthinkable had happened, not at sunrise, but because of what happened before it, when mercy proved stronger than vengeance, and one small fire burned warm enough to melt the frost of hatred, if only for a moment.